I just wanted to talk quickly about Ukraine because we have to talk about Ukraine because, of course, it remains the conflict. Now, again, this fury and rage about the fact that they're talking about Ukraine. The Russians and the Americans used to talk about Vietnam when the Vietnam War was underway. In fact, relations between the superpowers during the Vietnam War improved, despite the fact that they were each backing different sides, exactly as they are now in Ukraine. Now, there is a pathway to peace in Ukraine. The reason we have a war there is because that pathway has been consistently rejected. We have had a war that is being lost. Now, it seems to me that if you put away all the storm and anger and, the storm and theater and all of that, this is what the Americans are now finally saying, that there is a pathway to peace. That pathway lies to some extent through Moscow, though obviously others have a part to play. But Moscow is obviously the key party. Military victory is clearly not going to happen. In fact, what we're looking at is defeat. And we can nonetheless still find a way through. Now, am I getting this wrong?
Well, the war is, of course, a war between the US and Russia being fought on Ukrainian territory. It's not a war between Ukraine and Russia. This is the basic point. This goes back for 30 years in the Ukraine project of expanding the US military reach eastward basically, by the way, from Brussels to Vladivostok was the ultimate aim. In other words, this is US hegemony at play, and President Putin said no. The war broke out 11 years ago at the Maidan coup, which was also a U.S. Action to a very substantial extent to overthrow a Ukrainian government that favored neutrality, and the Ukrainian public favored neutrality overwhelmingly. There was no move by the Ukrainian people to join NATO. This was a top-down push and coup in February 2014. So in this sense, the war started by the United States eastward movement and every other U.S. action, especially, by the way, and it's very much underestimated in its impact, the 2002 unilateral abandonment of the anti-ballistic missile treaty by the United States was, to my view, the most profound destabilizer of all, because ultimately we're talking about survival, nation state survival, national security, missile systems. This is what has been on President Putin's mind for 20 years. Keep your missile systems away from our border. This has been enunciated repeatedly. As Ray McGovern, the former CIA wonderful analyst, told us a few months ago, in January 2022, Blinken said to Lavrov, the United States reserves the right to put in missile systems in Ukraine. So, of course, it's the US and Russia negotiating. Of course, the negotiations could have been between Ukraine and Russia in March 2022, where the United States should have jumped in and said, great, we have an end of this misconceived conflict, and they were close to finalizing it, and of course the US stopped it. Then we don't have to belabor the point, it's so foolish, but it was Zelensky who said, I'm never talking to them, ruled out any negotiations by decree in October 2022. And then they say, why aren't we included in the negotiations? Well, because Ukraine ruled them out. Come on. Can you say one sentence of truth? Similarly with Europe, I dealt a lot with Josep Borrell. I was inscribed at one time as an advisor to him. He fired me afterwards because I dared to say that the U.S. blew up Nord Stream. I was an unpaid advisor. I want to make clear this is only public service. But the point is, I said repeatedly, go talk to Moscow. No, 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 we can't talk to the enemy, the implacable foe. There's nothing to discuss. There's no negotiations possible. And then they complain when peace is breaking out. So I think this is going to change quickly. I really do. The point, obviously, the basic point about all of these wars, which people should keep in mind. Wars are very expensive propositions. They're big, capital-intensive operations. I'm putting aside the fact that they're devastating, dangerous, and kill a lot of people. But they require big power backing. Whatever Europe may say, whatever Zelensky may say, or whatever any of them may say, the war is ending because the U.S. is ending its arms and financial support to Ukraine. It's over. Now, people can deal with it in a truthful way. They can deal with it in a grown-up way, or they can rant and rave and they can be foolish and idiotic. Europe can say, we're going to continue to fight the war. I'll tell you a secret. No, you're not. You can't. It's impossible. So get on with something more realistic.
I agree. Can I ask you about China? Because the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi also made a speech in Munich, which has attracted no attention, but which I thought was very, very interesting and very consequential, because he clearly is aware that the Americans are now accepting, and Secretary of State Rubio has talked about this, that there is a multipolar system, that there are now different great powers, that those great powers pursue their interests, and that the role of diplomacy is to achieve, to resolve conflicts. That was what Marco Rubio said, and it is really an astonishing breakthrough conceptually that he said that. But Wang Yi went further than that, and he said, look, we are great powers. There are great powers in the world, but we mustn't think of the relationship between great powers as necessarily or properly adversarial. There's no reason to even look for conflicts. What you should do instead is work together in harness, in partnership. And that ultimately is much more efficient and far more effective. And of course, better, not just for the great powers, but for humanity altogether. Now, I have to say, again, to me, that is common sense. And you said at the start of the program that, in your opinion, there is no fundamental conflicts with America and Russia, with which I agree. And you also said, which I also agree with, that there is no fundamental conflict between America and China either. But of course, there are so many people in the United States, including in the current administration, who think otherwise. So can you say something to that? Because it looks to me as if Wang Yi is holding the door open.
There's so many interesting things to say about Chinese statecraft and about U.S.-China relations. One place to start is that President Trump said yesterday or the day before, this Ukraine war, it's not about, we shouldn't be doing this. We have this big, beautiful ocean between us and the Russians. We're not in conflict with each other. Well, the Pacific Ocean is a lot bigger. China is not in a million years going to invade the United States, and the U.S. can't invade and defeat China. It's very simple. The two, if we're misguided, could provoke each other. The United States could do in East Asia what it did in Ukraine. The obvious analogy is Taiwan. If the United States continues to provoke to unilaterally arm Taiwan, this could trigger war. The war would be devastating for the world, but devastating for the United States, as every war game has shown. And it makes sense. You fight a war against China, thousands of miles away from your shores. You think that's going to work in this day and age with new technologies, with the hypersonic missile systems attacking your naval fleets, with the continual space surveillance of the oceans and so on. Come on, this is so ridiculous. Even the idea is absurd. Now, that's one point. There's no possibility that the two sides could damage each other except to blow up the world. And so stop provoking. This is the number one point. Number two is Chinese statecraft. It's incredibly mature, in my opinion, and in my experience. And I go back in China 43 years, and I don't know how many dozens or hundreds of visits, but it's a lot, many times every year. Chinese statecraft is extraordinarily impressive because you do feel the lessons and awareness of 2,200 years of history of statecraft. The U.S. is a baby compared to this, trying to find its footing. China was unified first in 221 BC. Now, there's a phenomenal period to understand and study between 1368, the beginning of the Ming Dynasty, and 1839, which was when Britain invaded.
Oh. Hello? I've lost him.
Yeah, it froze.
Froze.
War. Oh, sorry?
You're back. You froze for a bit.
Just a second.
You stopped on when Britain invaded China.
China. Yes. So 1839, when Britain invaded. During that period of several centuries, East Asia was dominated by a very successful China, but not tormented by China. It was an era of peace. Unbelievable. Europe's fighting. Everybody's fighting each other, killing each other, nonstop wars. East Asia is in peace, sometimes called the Confucian peace. So you had nation states, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, China. They're not fighting each other for centuries. China never, ever in its history invaded Japan, ever. The Mongols did when they controlled China twice, in 1274 and 1281 AD. They tried, and they were defeated by the so-called kamikaze winds, two typhoons. But the point is, the Chinese, when they were running the show, not the Yuan Mongol dynasty, but the Ming and the Qing, never invaded Japan, never invaded Korea, right there, right on the border, never. With Vietnam, there was a war, 1410 to 1427. Basically 17 years out of 6 centuries. Whereas think about France and Britain, for example, nonstop, 100 years wars, nonstop conflict. So the idea that China is an aggressive power, there's nothing in the Chinese statecraft, history, or tradition of this. Even when China was undoubtedly the regional hegemon in terms of power, it did not impose punitive actions. It did not invade. It did not try to expand its territories. This is all very important to understand, because when Wang Yi speaks about statecraft, he's speaking about a very deep vision of statecraft. When the West speaks about statecraft and the Westphalian order and so forth, they're speaking either with knowledge or implicitly, with their implicit knowledge or their background culture, that states fight each other. And in the international relations of the West, the realism idea is, well, it's just a tragedy. We're doomed to fight. The Chinese actually do not hold that view. And I mean, not just superficially, not propagandistically, actually, they do not hold that view. They do not quite understand, why are you always fighting? Stop. We can get along. We can trade. We can do other things. And this is absolutely, basically true. China does not threaten the United States in any way. It happens to be extremely successful, very dynamic, technologically sophisticated. Wonderful. It's bringing all sorts of great things to the world, like DeepSeek, low-cost AI, and many, many other things.
And China has, for most of its history, been technologically advanced and economically successful, which is a fact people tend to overlook.
It gave the world the gunpowder, but it used it for fireworks, and the West perfected it to go back and beat the hell out of China. This is history.
I just wanted to ask now about the United States, because this is the other thing, because there is a certain view, which I think is ultimately a European view, that if you're a great power, the way you achieve wealth is through basically being predatory. That the United States itself would benefit massively from disarmament, a proper system of international relations, peace, and all of those things. Because I think some Americans are afraid of it. They'll think they'll be swamped by Chinese goods and the economy will be devastated and the dollar will lose its reserve currency status, and this will be a tragedy for the United States. I don't agree. I've always felt, this is my last question, by the way, that the United States could actually prosper and do much better, in fact, from a peaceful system than this very tense neocon system that we've been living under for 30 years.
Of course. I think there are also a couple of basic points that are really important. For many centuries, many recent centuries, certainly the 20th century, the idea that control over natural resources was the decisive element of economic wealth, the military power, national greatness was taken for granted. And in the petroleum age, especially after Churchill put the British fleet on oil, this was the view. You have to control the Middle East. You have to control the natural resources. We're living in an age, of course, it may sound trite to say, but it's true. We're living in an age where it is technology, it is advanced technology, it is digital technologies, it is a knowledge-based economy that's the source of wealth, the source of well-being. And you don't need that physical control over natural resources in the same way at all. Now, I don't know whether the Trump administration is going to follow that particular logic. Donald Trump loves oil and gas under the ground. This is not where our future lies in the 21st century, actually, but he loves it. It's not the basis of U.S. Well-being, U.S. prosperity. Now, there is, to put it a different way, no shortcut to economic well-being in a knowledge economy except knowledge, technology, systems, thinking carefully, basing decision-making on evidence, on science, and so forth. China is extremely good at that. Made in China 2025, which was an initiative launched a decade ago to come to the forefront of several technologies, succeeded because it was systematic, because it had a decade-long, if not 20 or 30-year-long forward vision. For the United States to succeed, it should do what it absolutely can do. We have wonderful universities, wonderful research centers, wonderful enterprises that are investing heavily in research and development, building the economy. It has nothing to do with war with Russia, war with China, fights over natural resources. It's knowledge, capacity, organization, science and technology. This is what we're really talking about right now. Incidentally, the protectionism that the Trump administration is putting in is also beside the point. It's a little sad. It's not getting to the point. If Trump will play to America's strengths, which is its deep educational excellence, its technological excellence, It's human diversity, which is wonderful because I live in New York City. I hear English once in a while. And I love the fact that 200 languages are spoken. It makes it a great city that reaches the entire world and becomes a media and financial and technology diplomatic capital. This is the strengths. I think Trump gets a lot of this absolutely right. War is useless. This isn't about war. This is not about conflict and so forth. He gets that right. And if he can play to America's true strengths, this is going to be a golden age, exactly what he wants it to be. If he plays to, the short-term gimmicks, the thinking grab resources or somehow protectionism or something else, it will not quite work the same way.
Professor Sachs, thank you so much. I know you've got a tight schedule, but you've given us your time, and we're very, very grateful. Thank you very much.
Always great to be with you guys. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.